In 1922, a new nation emerged from the ashes of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union. This event marked a turning point in world history, ushering in an era of communist rule and ideological conflict. The creation of the Soviet Union was a result of years of turmoil and upheaval in Russia. The country had been ravaged by World War I, and its people were exhausted and disillusioned. Into this void stepped a new political force, the Bolsheviks, led by the charismatic and ruthless Vladimir Lenin. The Bolsheviks promised peace, bread, and land to the Russian people, quickly gaining support among the working class and peasantry. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in a coup d'etat, marking the beginning of the Soviet Union. To understand the rise of the Soviet Union, it is essential to examine the historical context that led to its creation. Russia in the early 20th century was a land of stark contrasts. On the one hand, it was a vast empire, rich in natural resources and home to a diverse population. On the other hand, it was a deeply unequal society, with a small elite of nobles and wealthy landowners controlling most of the wealth and power. The majority of Russians were peasants, living in poverty and tied to the land. Industrialization was beginning to take hold in Russia's cities, but it also brought harsh working conditions and low wages for factory workers. Political and social unrest had been brewing in Russia for decades. The Tsarist regime, headed by the autocratic Tsar Nicholas II, was seen by many as repressive and out of touch with the needs of the people. Various revolutionary groups emerged, advocating for radical change, including the Bolsheviks, a faction of the Marxist Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. The year 1917 was pivotal in Russian history. World War I worsened social and economic problems. Millions fought in a brutal war, leading to food shortages and discontent. In February 1917, an uprising in Petrograd sparked the February Revolution. Protests escalated into calls for the Tsar to step down. The Tsar abdicated, ending the Romanov dynasty's rule. A provisional government emerged but continued the war. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, exploited the discontent. In October 1917, they staged an armed insurrection, seizing power. Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Party, played a pivotal role in the creation of the Soviet Union. Born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov in 1870, Lenin became involved in revolutionary politics at a young age. He was a brilliant strategist, a gifted orator, and a ruthless leader. Lenin believed that Russia was ripe for a socialist revolution. He argued that the Tsarist regime was inherently oppressive and that only a radical overthrow of the existing order could bring about true social justice. Lenin developed his own interpretation of Marxism, known as Leninism, which emphasized the need for a vanguard party to lead the proletariat to revolution. After the February Revolution, Lenin returned to Russia from exile in Switzerland. He rallied the Bolshevik Party around his leadership and began to implement a strategy to seize power. Following the October Revolution, Lenin emerged as the leader of the new Soviet government, quickly setting about implementing his vision of a socialist state. The Bolshevik seizure of power did not go unchallenged. The Russian Civil War, a brutal and bloody conflict, erupted soon after the October Revolution. The Bolsheviks, also known as the Reds, faced opposition from a variety of groups, including monarchists, liberals, and other socialist factions, collectively known as the Whites. The Civil War raged for 5 years, from 1918 to 1922, and claimed millions of lives. The Bolsheviks ultimately emerged victorious, largely due to their superior organization, discipline, and willingness to use brutal tactics to suppress dissent. During the Civil War, the Bolsheviks unleashed a campaign of terror known as the Red Terror. This campaign was aimed at eliminating opposition to Bolshevik rule and consolidating their power. The Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police, carried out mass arrests, executions, and torture. The Red Terror targeted anyone perceived as a threat to the regime, including former Tsarist officials, landowners, intellectuals, and members of the clergy. The Red Terror left a lasting legacy of fear and repression in Soviet society. The Bolshevik victory in the Russian Civil War marked the beginning of a new era in Russian history. The Tsarist Empire, which had existed for centuries, was no more. In its place stood the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union, a vast multinational state based on the principles of communism. The creation of the Soviet Union was a monumental task. The Bolsheviks faced the daunting challenge of transforming a vast agrarian empire into a modern, industrialized socialist state. They sought to create a society based on equality, social justice, and the abolition of class distinctions. One of the most significant changes introduced by the Bolsheviks was the nationalization of industry. Factories, mines, and other means of production were seized from private owners and placed under state control. The Bolsheviks believed that by controlling the means of production, they could ensure that the wealth generated by the economy would be distributed more equitably. Another key element of the Bolshevik program was the collectivization of agriculture, where private land ownership was abolished, and peasants were forced to join collective farms, known as kolkhozes. The creation of the Soviet Union had a profound impact on world history. It emerged as a major power, rivaling the United States. The embrace of communism sparked ideological conflicts that shaped the 20th century. The rise inspired communist movements worldwide. The Soviet Union provided material support to these movements. The Cold War dominated international relations, marked by an arms race and proxy wars. Achievements in space, like Yuri Gagarin's flight, showcased Soviet capabilities. The early years of the Soviet Union were a time of great upheaval and change. The Bolsheviks embarked on an ambitious program of social engineering, seeking to create a new Soviet man free from the shackles of the past. The Soviet government introduced free universal education, healthcare, and social welfare programs. Literacy rates soared and access to education and healthcare expanded dramatically, particularly for the rural poor. Women were granted equal rights under the law, and opportunities for women in education and the workforce increased. However, the reality of life in the early Soviet Union often fell short of the ideals espoused by the Bolsheviks. The collectivization of agriculture in particular proved to be a disaster. The forced collectivization of farms led to widespread famine, particularly in Ukraine, where millions perished in the Holodomor, a man-made famine engineered by Stalin's regime. The Soviet Union under Stalin's rule descended into a totalitarian dictatorship. The Great Purge, a period of political repression and terror from the mid-1930s to the late 1930s, targeted anyone perceived as a threat to Stalin's power, including members of the Communist Party, intellectuals, artists, and ordinary citizens. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, marking the end of an era. The collapse of the Soviet Union had a profound impact on Russia and the world. The legacy of the Soviet Union is a complex and contested one. On the one hand, the Soviet Union achieved significant social and economic progress. It transformed a largely agrarian society into an industrial and military power. It provided free education, healthcare, and social welfare programs to its citizens. It played a significant role in defeating Nazi Germany in World War II. On the other hand, the Soviet Union was also a totalitarian dictatorship responsible for the deaths of millions of its own citizens. The Soviet government suppressed dissent, persecuted minorities, and engaged in widespread human rights abuses. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to the emergence of 15 new independent states, including Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. The Soviet Union was a bold experiment in social engineering, an attempt to create a utopian society based on the principles of communism. However, the Soviet experiment ultimately failed. The Soviet Union's collapse was due to a complex interplay of factors, including economic stagnation, political repression, and the rise of nationalism. The legacy of the Soviet Union continues to be debated and discussed today. While the Soviet Union is no more, its impact on the course of history is undeniable. It serves as a reminder of the human capacity for both great good and great evil, and the enduring quest for a more just and equitable world.